Hey everybody, Mr. Dan here. Welcome to my top 15 scary or horror related print media items. Books, comic books, magazines, zines. Here I am opening a little something special I just ordered. You'll probably see one of these later. This is from Groovy Doom. They have something called Drive-In Asylum on Saturday nights where Bill Van Ryn and Sam Panico will do a double feature, and they'll give you the links so you can watch along and then watch their commentary. But this is their zine that they put out, and this one happens to be a 1980 yearbook where they'll have interviews and they'll go back and show you some TV listings and some posters from around the country. It's often kind of interesting to see what movies were paired up with what films and to see all the different alternate titles of so many of the horror films. So I'm going to have all kinds of stuff in here. Here's some examples of some of the other Groovy Doom, Drive-In Asylum magazines that I've gotten from them in the past. I've got quite a collection actually, but you're going to see one of those later on for sure. So we'll put that aside. Now a lot of you are going to say, hey, what's with all the comic books and the art books and stuff? How come you don't have any classic literature like Dracula? Well, I would probably have to reread, I have read a lot of these before, Dracula, Frankenstein, H.P. Lovecraft. And I've been collecting them too. I just picked up some H.P. Lovecraft from Barnes & Nobles. I picked up this nice Dracula edition with the silvery paper a while ago, but I would have to reread these for them to be on the list. It's been a while. So let's get going with number 15. Now the way this works is the first 9 are sort of random, hard for me to rank them, and then but the top 6 are going to be pretty much my favorite 6. So we're going to start off with the Thing art book. This is a must-have if you're a fan of the Thing, and who isn't a fan of the Thing? And here's a little hint. We're going to see that come back in the countdown. Also check my Instagram, Mr. Dan Horror Hot Wheels, for a few bonus print media items. But just all kinds of alternate posters, conceptual artwork, just all kinds of stuff. Every character in the film has a few pages. Of course, Kurt Russell has many pages, but just all kinds of different styles of artwork, and just it's something you can look through periodically every few months for a couple of hours at a time. So the Thing art book. And then next we have, these are cool. And I follow Grace Chan on Instagram. There you see a button that came with this one, Nards. And these are 2 I Heart Rudy magazines. I'm going with the second one. This is something that Grace Chan put together. I'll put up her Instagram page in a moment. But I'm going to go with the second one. It's just got so many good interviews with Andre Gower and others. And, it's just basically a tribute to the Monster Squad, classic 80s movie. And there's a great Spanish language poster for the Monster Squad. Just all kinds of vintage ads in here and examples of some of the clothing worn in the movie. And if you follow Grace on Instagram, she's just a huge fan of the 80s. As far as fashion, as far as everything. There's the Monster Squad membership card, and there's an Atari advertisement with Andre Gower. Check out my review of Baby Frankenstein from a few Halloweens ago, which Andre Gower appeared in. Next, we got to go with Conan. I had almost this whole series. As you see, this one's a little worse for wear. I've had these since high school. This is by Robert E. Howard, but many of the stories have been filled in by other authors, such as L. Sprague de Camp, artwork by Frank Frazetta, and essentially he created a whole giant story arc, but he passed away at a young age. So some other authors have stepped in to fill in the blanks. Some people don't like to read these stories in this order, but this is how I read Conan originally, so he created a whole world, just like J.R.R. Tolkien did for Lord of the Rings. There's a map there, all the different, countries and fantasy lands that Conan will travel through and inhabit. There's a pretty good foreword in here about the life of Robert E. Howard. That's an awesome picture of Conan there. I still want to see the movie The Whole Wide World, which is about the life of Robert E. Howard, the short life, which stars Vincent D'Onofrio and Renee Zellweger. I just still never got around to watching it, but there we have a story, The Thing in the Crypt. So I'm wondering if that's going to mirror the part of Conan the Barbarian where he stumbles into the crypt and finds the sword. I think so. It's been a while since I read these. I think I'm going to try to finish this one before Halloween for sure. Been meaning to go back and reread those, so just such a huge Conan fan, so that had to be in there. Now, speaking of The Thing, okay, this is not going to be on the list. This is hard. This is The Thing novelization, which usually goes for pretty big bucks. Unfortunately, I did not have my reading glasses on when I ordered this, and this is in French. This is the French language version. Still pretty cool to have, but I just thought that was funny. This, however, is going to be on the list. Short Things. This is a collection of short stories based on the world of The Thing. There you see many of the authors. I have to say, there's only one story I didn't care for, and I think one story I was kind of neutral on, and then the rest I really liked. And as a matter of fact, some of them I thought were great, including this one I'm going to show you here, written by Pamela Sargent, and you have to, please remember, this is based on, it's called His Two Wars by Pamela Sargent. This is a reunion of Macready and Norris after the events of the book. So not the movie, so get the movie out of your head. And there's some also set in space, but that one, His Two Wars, takes place on early December in Hawaii in the year 1941, as Norris and Macready are dealing with some PTSD from the events of the book. So there's lots of cool different settings. For a lot of them take place in outer space, as you may imagine. This one here is more almost like a comedy one, The Thing Maker. It actually has several historical characters in it, including Harry S. Truman when he was a senator, Audie Murphy, and then at the end, another surprise historical character shows up. This one is very clever and just a lot of fun. I highly recommend Short Things if you're a fan of The Thing. And then here we got another Drive-In Asylum magazine. I've been talking about horror hosts this month. So they put out this special one a while ago, a tribute to horror hosts. And many of the contributors to the zine here have interviewed many of the hosts. And there you see a Dr. Shock. Now that's not Philadelphia's Dr. Shock. There he is. The horror host I grew up with, Dr. Shock, and his daughter Bubbles. More about him in a little bit. But this thing is fantastic. It's got all kinds of interviews with horror hosts from around the country. And I love reading about different horror hosts and seeing if I can find any clips on YouTube. Even the names are just fun. Dr. Paul Bearer, there you have Goulardi. And let's see who's coming up next. Count Grigori. And, a lot of people know of Vampira from, Plan 9 from Outer Space, but she really was very intelligent, very original, and there's quite a bit of information about here in this magazine, including some newspaper headlines. I think the media was a little bit unfair to her sometimes, sensationalizing some unfortunate things that happened in her personal life, but fascinating to read about. And she's highly influential, of course. And there we have Newcastle After Dark. These are modern-day horror hosts on YouTube. And typically, unless I've seen the movie many, many times, I watch their show every month on YouTube. At least I watch the introduction to see what they have to say about it, because those two guys are highly entertaining. And what do we have next? Speaking of horror hosts, Scary Monsters. All hail the horror host issue. Now you recognize some of these guys in the front. There's Joe Bob, Svengoolie, and that was Vampira again. Of course, Elvira on the back. And Bill Cardile, Chili Billy, among others. And what I really like about this is they have another later era Philadelphia horror host, which I'll show you in a second, but there's more Vampira articles. Great interview with Joe Bob Briggs. He's always entertaining to listen to, even in print form. I always hear his voice in my head, even when I'm reading about him. All right, Kenny from Kenny's Movie Palace. Let's see if you remember Stella from Saturday Night Dead. She was on Channel 3 in the 80s, kind of a later stage horror host. And that's what pushes this magazine into the top 15, the inclusion of Stella, for sure. She brought certain assets to the table that were very much appreciated by my generation. And she was very witty, very funny lady. There she is with Zachary, who stopped by the studio, which is, like a meeting of two worlds, two generations. There's Rip Taylor. It was always cool back in the day when celebrities would stop by local stations just for a bit, for a quick interview or an appearance during a horror hosting segment. That was a cool thing. And they also have an interview with Dr. Gangrene, one of my favorite modern horror hosts. I watch his Halloween countdown video every October. This year he's actually doing a whole month of movies that have horror hosts, so I'm looking forward to learning about that. And there you go, look at that. That's Count Gordeval, Dick Dysel, who was in a few movies, so I'm sure he's going to be in there. And that was Jason's horror host from Horrific Nightmares JM. So, and it's cool, Dr. Gangrene's been around a while. There he is, actually in a Dick Tracy comic strip. How cool is that? That would be cool. Oh, and by the way, that Halloween special, that's a collaboration between Dr. Gangrene and Penny Dreadful. She's in New England. She also has a podcast called Terror in Collinswood, which is about dark shadows, if you're into that. And I actually have a little package that I ordered from her, which I'll be unboxing on the channel, or opening on the channel this month. So make sure you check that out. Just a great magazine. Lots of great vintage ads. Not vintage, but ads for the kinds of products that we would love to buy if money was no option. Here's some Mego figures in a second I'm going to show you. Look what at the top it says, it's Hammer Time. Dracula, the Phantom, man, Zombie from Plague of Zombies. Wow. And there's some, look at that, some model kits. I remember model kits back in the day. And next up we have a Marvel comic, Vision and Scarlet Witch, limited series number 1. I have shown this on the channel. There you see Vision and Scarlet Witch strolling in their neighborhood during Halloween. So there's trick-or-treaters about. This is a great comic to read on Halloween. And it takes place during Halloween night as a evil druid transforms 3 trick-or-treaters into demonic versions of their costumes. There's just so much nostalgia with this whole limited series, but especially this first issue. And there's the picture of the evil druid there. So a fun one. Check out my unboxing of some horror comics that I did back in September. And next we have the Twilight Zone Companion. Now our good friend Anthony from the YouTube channel Fever Dreamland Theater has interviewed the author of this, Mark Scott Zicree. So make sure you check that out. And this is a fantastic volume. All kinds of information about Rod Serling and his life. And then, of course, they cover each individual episode. There he is, the man. And it's really just fascinating stuff. It's so cool to take a deep dive into these episodes. And there's an example of an entry for the episode Third from the Sun, which was based on a story by Richard Matheson. More about him in a moment. There's Charles Beaumont, another author that contributed to many Twilight Zone scripts. It's just fascinating to go behind the scene and see who was in the cast and even where the music came from. And there you have an iconic episode right there with one of the iconic aliens, the episode To Serve Man with Richard Keel as the Canamite. And there's William Wyndham in the Search of an Exit episode. Yeah, just fascinating stuff. Yeah, lots of great appendixes at the end. Even a brief discussion of some of the other Twilight Zone series that came later in the 80s and 90s. And then speaking of Rod Serling, we have the Rod Serling's Night Gallery After Hours tour by Scott Skelton and Jim Benson with a foreword by John Aston, who was actually kind of thought of as an up-and-coming director back then. There you see a couple signatures there. This one is kind of set up in a similar way to the Twilight Zone companion. Some pretty good information about Rod Serling. There you see a breakdown of all the illustrations. By the way, Skelton and Benson run a website dedicated to all things Night Gallery, and that's where I got these bookmarks, which I'll show you in a second. Very cool. I'm going to show you the Joan Crawford one from the pilot episode in a moment here. The episode Eyes, directed by Steven Spielberg. And there's some information about Rod Serling. You know, this is a very candid volume. The production of the Night Gallery was not always smooth sailing. Rod Serling was not the showrunner for this series. Jack Laird was. So they talk about the difference in styles between Rod Serling and Jack Laird, and some of the episodes that Laird directed himself. Of course, they have a breakdown of all the different episodes. And one thing they do differently than the Twilight Zone companion is they rate them. They give them a ranking. And at the end, there's actually an index starting with the very good ones to the, well, I'll show you in a minute, but they are very candid. So let's take a look at this one. Here you have Eyes. This is the one directed by Steven Spielberg, so they give that 4 out of 4 stars. I would agree. That's a really good one. Also starring Tom Bosley. As you see here, they pull no punches with Professor Peabody's last election. 1.5 stars. Ouch. So that, yeah, and you know, there was typically 2 or 3 segments in every episode of, so there you have evaluating the episodes. There's the 4-star episodes. A lot of the ones that get the lower ranking are the short segments, because there you have 2.5. Some of the shorter ones just didn't work. They were like comedy oriented. So look what it says there. An absolute disgrace. Whose ever fault it was. 0.5 star. Ouch. And there you have musical cues. The music was done by Gil Melee, the theme song, the opening theme song. But they have lots of musical cues. And that was one of the first series that used an electronic score, kind of an iconic score, but they sort of break down all the different musical elements of each episode, something you don't see very often. And what do we have next? What do we have next? Talk amongst yourselves. We have, let's go back to the original. Who Goes There? This is the novella that was the basis of The Thing by John Campbell. Okay. The place stank, a queer mingled stench that only the ice-buried cabins of an Antarctic camp know. Blair stirred uneasily, his bony fingers wriggling under the harsh light. Gary looked about the crowded room. 32 men, some tense nervously standing against the wall, some uneasily relaxed, some sitting, most perforce standing, as intimate as sardines. Clark looked up from the galley stove as Van Wall, Barkley, McCready, and Benning came in, brushing the drift from their clothes. So yes, some of the character names do correspond with John Carpenter's The Thing, and it's very interesting to read the book and to see kind of what traits they have in common with each other. And there's a screen treatment by William F. Nolan, who also does the foreword. So kind of fascinating to see another screen treatment from the one we got for John Carpenter's The Thing. But just an iconic science fiction story. John W. Campbell was mostly known as an editor, but this is, of course, his magnum opus as far as his own original science fiction story goes, in my opinion. And Asimov said he's the most powerful force in science fiction. That's pretty high praise, I think. Next, we have, speaking of Richard Matheson, who contributed many scripts to The Twilight Zone, The Best of Richard Matheson, a collection of short stories. I read and reread these regularly. So many of these were made into Twilight Zone episodes. There you have Duel, TV movies, made for TV movies. And you see that it's not an especially long story, so it's interesting to go back and read the original source material. A Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, classic Twilight Zone episode. It's interesting to reread or read the stories and then compare them to the episodes. The Third from the Sun, we've already talked about that. And there you also have Amelia is also in this, which of course was the basis for the segment of Trilogy of Terror, starring Karen Black. So, just a great author, just an incredibly influential author. And if you haven't checked out any Richard Matheson stories, you're missing out. If you don't think you know who he is, you probably do, because he's written so many screenplays and scripts, and he's influenced so many people. It's pretty amazing stuff. And next, we have something fascinating dealing with TV movies. Are You in the House Alone? A TV movie compendium from 1964 to 1999, edited by Amanda Reyes. Check out the made-for-TV movie Mayhem Instagram page. I have gotten so many recommendations. There's Kolchak right there. I've gotten so many recommendations from this book and that Instagram page. Of course, not all of these are horror, but many of them are. Many of the iconic made-for-TV movies were horror films. So this is just it's a fascinating resource to have. There you have Cruise into Terror. So many of them, they've got so many great names. A Duel, there you've got Duel. One of my top 3 made-for-TV movies. Probably one of my top 3 Steven Spielberg movies. Just some great stuff. Look What Happened to Rosemary's Baby. Hey, is it going to be as good as Rosemary's Baby? Probably not. But it came on TV back in the day, and people watched it. Something Evil, directed by Steven Spielberg. I still haven't seen Look What Happened to Rosemary's Baby, by the way, but I definitely will check it out eventually. All kinds of great stuff. And next we have Into the Unknown, The Fantastic Life of Nigel Neal by Andy Murray. Nigel Neal was a screenwriter based in the United Kingdom. He talks a little bit about his early life, being born on the Isle of Man, where they speak a language called Manx. And this guy, he created Quatermass and The Pit, and just so many great teleplays that aired on BBC, and then were later made into films, especially Hammer films. And he's also an uncredited screenwriter on Halloween 3. So in a way, he influenced that comic that I showed you earlier. But just a fascinating look into, there's Quatermass in the Pit. Also just a fascinating look into the early days of television, where in the United Kingdom they would have teleplays that would run on Sunday nights and then again on Thursday nights. These were live performances on TV, starring people like Peter Cushing in 1984. And a lot of these, unfortunately, have been lost forever. So they go into the mechanics of why that happened, and it's just really fascinating. So there's his filmography, but he's also got... And the other thing that jumps out is he wrote so many screenplays that were just never used. I mean, he put in a lot of work. Fascinating stuff. His wife was apparently a children's author, which I found pretty interesting. But he's got also his teleplays, Beasts. Oh, that's a good series. Most of those are on YouTube. I definitely want to get a physical copy of Beasts. They have his TV work, his stage work, and his films in there as well. Speaking of Hammer, this is a biography of Michael Ripper, great character actor that appeared in about 30 Hammer films and dozens of others, oftentimes in small roles, but often in very critical roles. This was just fascinating, He every time he was in a movie, he just made it better. So I have a review of this biography on my channel. Go ahead and check it out. And there I found a sale from a Lego pirate ship, which was in this book for some reason. There he is, in the mummy's tomb. Typically he played oftentimes sort of sidekicks, drunks, carriage drivers, things like that. And just made everything better. There he is in older age, let her rip. But this was a great biography. And in a minute, I'm going to show you a picture. There he is with Christopher Lee. They were at kind of a convention of sorts in the United Kingdom. They were very, very great friends. And, like I said, he appeared in about 30 or so Hammer films. And there's his entire filmography. Just all kinds of stuff. Fascinating to go back and read about the war years. There you have theater, television, and film appendixes. So, fascinating stuff. And there's the entry for The Mummy, the Hammer film starring Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, and directed by Terence Fisher. He has a great little role in that one. And which brings us, I believe, to number one. What is it going to be? The frightful Dr. Shock. I told you you'd see him again. And this was written by John Skierchak. And there's Dr. Shock and Bubbles once again. This book is many things. It's a trip down memory lane, certainly. You have a couple different introductions there. It's part biography, part episode guide, part behind the scenes of the various programs that Dr. Shock hosted, which I'll show you in a second. I have very fond memories of these. And he was a magician, and he's quite funny. Call a ghoul. So they had some funny sort of faux advertisements throughout the series. There's an ad for Scream-In Theater, and there you see Scream-In Theater there. Whenever you see that background, that's Scream-In Theater. Now, I don't have any recollections of that. That was on late Friday nights. Eventually, he would move to Saturday afternoon for Mad Theater and then Horror Theater, 2 back-to-back 1.5-hour time slots. And if you look through the book, the index of all the episodes, which is fascinating to realize what I was doing on a particular day back in, let's say, 1976. They have it broken down. There's Godzilla there. They have it broken down which movies he played. And the reason he had 2 time slots is in case one or the other was preempted by local sports, which was always a dark day. And for me as a kid, because I was not really interested in sports, I was much more interested in horror movies, he could still maybe run one of the program. And there's a picture of Stella there. They talk about some other Philadelphia area personalities. But this is just fascinating. I'm constantly looking through the index, and I will be reviewing some of the films that appeared on the Dr. Shock program this month. And I'm going to try to review some of the ones that I don't have any recollection of. So it's just fascinating to go ahead and thumb through this and look back and to realize that on February 21st, 1976, I probably watched a double feature of The Mummy and I Was a Teenage Werewolf. Most certainly. And as I mentioned, Dr. Shock was a magician. He actually had a couple magic tricks that you can send away for. He was almost ahead of his time when it comes to what we now call merch. But here's one in the book. Go ahead and stare at the dot on Dr. Shock's nose for 20 seconds and then look at a blank wall and you're supposed to be able to see his face. Shocky Doc's ghost. Yeah, he often referred to himself as Shocky Doc. Well, anyway, I really want to thank you guys for joining me in my top 15 print media countdown. What are some of your favorite books, comic books, magazines, anything that you treasure from your youth or childhood? Let me know in the comments below, and come back again for some more live streams and some more usually not top 15. Usually it's going to be top 11, to be honest with you. Actually, I think this one was top 16. Anyway, some countdowns. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments below. Come back again next time. Later.